Hello everybody and welcome to my new video. So today what I wanted to talk about was the Goodreads Choice 2024 Sci-Fi winners and nominees. So this is not going to be your typical Goodreads video because I didn't do a blog while I was reading all these. I'm just going to tell you the list of the top 10 and what I thought about them. There's some I didn't read, some that I loved, some that I hated. So let's just get right into it. Okay, so we're going to start from number 10 to number 1. So number 10 is The Other Valley. This is, I obviously don't have any of the books. I'm traveling. That would be crazy. So The Other Valley is my first DNF. And I'm so sorry, but this one's not a bad book. It's just written like a very middle grade book. So this book is about a girl who lives in the valley. And in her valley, it's the right time, like it's current time. But if you go to the valley next to the west, it's 30 years in the past. And if you go to the valley on the east, it's 30 years in the future. So she's in the only valley that's like the correct time. And she joins this program of kids that can go to this school to train them to become says, I think is the word that she uses. And that is the people that decide whether or not people are going to be able to come into the future or into the past, and whether or not the reason for them to ask for this request is good enough. And usually the reason that people ask for this type of request is because of grief. So it's like, oh, like I lost my son and I want to see him one more time. So they'll like request to go into the past, or like, oh, like I am about to die and I want to see what my kids look like in 30 years. So that's a reason to go into the future. So it's that type of decision. So she goes into the school in order to be able to make this type of decisions. But the school, obviously, I DNF'd it 40% in. So right now I was just kind of like in the flow of it, seeing whether or not she was going into school. The only reason I didn't like it as much as other books, but this is only a personal reason. If you think that the whole story seemed interesting, I think you should definitely pick it up. Is that it was written to be more of like a young adult book, and it was dealing with a lot of like normal young adult problems, and I thought the concept was more interesting than the execution. Like obviously I wanted to see all these like intricate decisions being taken into action, but the book really was more about this girl and her day-to-day and how she didn't get along with her mother and the crush she had on this boy. So I was like, I'm bored, and I kind of wanted to finish this video, so I was like, you know what, I'm DNFing it, and I probably will pick it up in the future, but it is not something that I immediately need to pick up as right now. Okay. So the next book in the list is I Cheerfully Refuse. This is book number 9. So this one is a bit of a mixed bag. I think it started really strong because it was about this post-apocalyptic world. It's more like a dystopian world where like kind of like the economy went to crap, and like the global warming, it's really taken into account. Like all the major corporations kind of became like super conglomerates and society kind of like is like the 1% and then everybody else. And it's very dire for everybody else. And they're basically just trying to live their life when they're dealing with like basically nobody knows how to read anymore. Nobody knows how to use technology. They're just very like, nobody studies, nobody goes to school or university. So a lot of the normal knowledge got lost, and you're dealing with a family. It's a man and a woman who actually run one of the last bookstores, and it's still like super small bookstore, when one day a stranger comes into town with this very book that the woman considers to be precious, and she was missing in her collection, and then a bunch of shenanigans kind of happen afterwards. And it's one of those situations where I thought the start of the book was incredibly well written. I love where we were going, and then something happens about like in the 30% mark that kind of becomes more, the book becomes more of a road trip, and you're just following this man on a boat down a river. Well, not a river, it's Lake Michigan, down Lake Michigan for a bajillion pages, and it becomes very monotonous, but it's still very interesting because you still like, you want to see what the rest of the world looks like, and like you go into all these societies. Some of them are very like kind of like still very cozy, still very like civilized, and others have completely devolved. So it's very interesting to see all of those differences and how people immediately form connections and corruption, even though you think that when society collapses, that's it, nobody's gonna do that anymore, but it really becomes even more ingrained in the humanity to kind of like screw everybody over in order to survive. So, super interesting book. It kind of devolves into like a road trip, and then there's like this maniacal villain that has a really long monologues, and then you're like, why are you doing this? And it never becomes very clear. So plot wise, I thought the plot left a lot to be desired, but then like the ideas were good and the execution sometimes was very good. The book almost made me cry in a lot of parts because the writing and the message was there. It was just like the plot and the execution that was not there. So I think a lot of people will still enjoy this book. It was a very solid 3 stars for me, and I kind of like picked it up and didn't put it down, so I think it's still very interesting. So then, the next book, number 8, is a book I didn't actually read, is The Moon of the Turning Leaf. I didn't read it because it was the second book in a series, so I'm just going to skip it and go straight to the next book, which is number 7, Extinction. So, Extinction is Jurassic Park ripoff. It's kind of mean to say that, but it is super Jurassic Park ripoff. It's incredibly crazy that they got away with it, but again, like, honestly, it's a little bit of fun. And even in the book, they say like, oh, like Jurassic Park, and they're like, no, it's nothing like Jurassic Park. That's kind of like the line that you're like, really? It's nothing like Jurassic Park? It's exactly like Jurassic Park. So in this book, there's a group of people that just created a zoo where instead of having dinosaurs, you have like woolly mammoths and like all animals from that era, like the Ice Age rather than the dinosaur age. And they're all supposed to be very docile. They're supposed to be very in the park, and none of them get out, and there's nothing bad happening. And you can rent like tours in order to go into the wild with the animals and kind of like see them like a safari. And a lot of rich people do that. But one day, two people that are on their honeymoon go out and get murdered. And nobody knows why they got murdered. This murdering was incredibly violent. There's a lot of blood. People are blaming the park. When a group of like park rangers and also some detectives come and try to solve the mystery, and they discover that there's more to it than they could have ever thought there's gonna be. And it's a little detective drama cheesiness, you know, if you like CSI and Law and Order, it's a little bit of that. And then there's also like the Jurassic Park mashup, and then there's also like this sci-fi element becomes a lot stronger than Jurassic Park. It's not just like all action. There's also some like more like science going on in the background that you get to discover as you're reading the book. So as literature, no. As a fun, good time, yes. Honestly, I had such a blast with this book. Even though it's the biggest Jurassic Park ripoff, and the detective is like a generic detective that she's like, oh, like, you know, like I got kicked out of my other force because I couldn't follow the rules, and oh my god. But it's just so much fun. I was having a lot of fun with this book, and the twist, let me know if you've read this book before, because I could see the twist coming like in page 100. I was like, this is what's gonna happen, and then it actually happened, and I was like, what? Shocking. But it's still a lot of fun. So I gave it a solid 3 stars. I think if you're looking for a nice palate cleanser, I would definitely recommend. And a lot of these books are very heavy, so I was definitely looking for a palate cleanser, and this book delivered. Book number 6, I read The Stardust Grail. It's right here. So this book is another fun space adventure, and I think we're kind of missing a lot of fun space adventures. And I think this list, if you saw the bottom 10, were all of their depressing dystopian, and the top 10 were all like this funny, like kind of like fun sci-fi. And I read a lot of the bottom 10. I'm gonna talk about them at the end. I read some of them for a little bit. But basically, I think we're moving past the depressing dystopian and depressing, like, because after COVID, a lot of books were coming out that were just like pandemic dystopian books or climate change dystopian books. And those books have their time and their place, and they're important. But for this type of like popularity contest, obviously they're not very popular because people don't necessarily like, the people that read those books don't necessarily rate them on Goodreads all that much. So I think the books that are more like fun and fast paced are definitely getting more of an accolade nowadays. So that is kind of what the Stardust Grail is. This book is about a girl who grew up in kind of like the outskirts of the solar system in a moon that wasn't like very populated, and she moves back to Earth in order to finish her PhD. But she's kind of like depressed because she doesn't know what to do, and she already went in all these adventures. But one day, like, one of her old pals from one of her adventures comes back, and the pal is kind of like a creature. Is like kind of like, I don't remember his name right now at the top of my head, but he's kind of like this blob that's also an octopus. He's very weird looking. And he is there. He goes by Uncle. So Uncle is there because he is looking for the Grail, and this Grail is what he needs to use in order to reproduce, because his species is basically dying, and his species is one of the oldest ones in the universe, and they're kind of responsible for a lot of like the major technological advances of the civilization, but they're also responsible for causing this deadly plague. So a lot of people like respect them, but other people just like, oh, they should all die off. They created this very dangerous plague. It's better off if they all die. So a lot of people want to help them reproduce, but a lot of people don't. So it's kind of up to her in order to go on this adventure with Uncle, in order to kind of like try to discover this Grail. But then like the humans also have to get the Grail, so it becomes like a race to get the Grail. And in that also, she kind of like gets into a crew of misfits that go into spaceships. So you have like the classic Uncle, which is like the big kind of like funny guy who's kind of like awkward and bubbly and kind of like your grandpa. You have like the very badass like robot, like the very badass like spy lady. You have the main character, then you have an actual robot who got sentient. So now he's trying to figure out how to make people laugh. And then you have like another main character that I thought it was super interesting. It was this guy who was her academic rival. It's not an academic rival to lovers scenario, sadly. I wish it was, but it isn't. But basically, it's her academic rival who joins her in the adventure. And he's very snobby, and they have a lot of quippy back and forth. It's a lot of fun to like, the dialogue is funny. So you go on this adventure, and honestly, it is good. I think it's very creative. I think it got some of the tropes that made the genre great, like, you know, like the buddy adventure, the spaceships, the traveling, the going from like planet to planet, very Star Wars, very Star Trek. It's a lot of fun. The only thing I think an adventure like this should have a lot of heart behind it, and I just wasn't feeling the heart. I wasn't feeling like The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. That book had some heart behind it. This one, I was like, not so much, you know, like, I feel you, I like you all, but I'm not like in love with y'all. I don't feel like I'm gonna miss my best friends when I leave you. I don't feel like I need to pick up like the next book and the next book and the next book and the next book just to be in the same room with these characters. And sometimes that takes a couple books, sometimes they'll grow on you. So that's my only complaint. I still gave it a very strong 4 stars. I definitely think this author has a lot of creativity behind her. So I think I will keep picking up her books because I think she's doing a great job so far. Okay, so we're getting to the top 5, and sadly the first book in the top 5, Orbital, I DNF'd. And I didn't DNF because I didn't like it. I DNF'd it because the library, my rental period in the library was over, and then the next time that when I tried to rent it, it was gonna be like 6 weeks, so I couldn't rent it. But I really, 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 really recommend this book because of the beautiful writing. This book reads like poetry, and it makes me emotional, and it's one of those books where like you're reading it, and I listened to the audiobook, and I could picture everything they were saying in my mind with such detail that it was almost like a picture in my head, because the writing was so beautiful, and you can like the metaphors kind of like work very well in this kind of like space adventure. But it's not really a space adventure, it's more like a everyday story set in space, because you're following this, I think it's 6 astronauts that are in the, it's not a space shuttle, the space center? The space station. So they're in the last space station on Earth, and they're orbiting Earth, and you're following them while they reminisce about like, oh, like Earth looks so beautiful from this angle. So they're also going through a lot of inner turmoil, because like one of the characters just lost their mother, another character is looking down as like a typhoon is passing through. So there's a lot of like inner turmoil. And again, I didn't read this book in completion at all, so take my advice, my review with a grain of salt. I think I read like the first 2 hours of it, listened to the audiobook, so not a complete review at all. But yeah, basically, you're just following them while they look down on Earth and reminisce about their lives, and it's very beautifully written. And I do recommend you pick it up if you're into that. And the cover is just gorgeous too. So I think I'll definitely pick it back up. It was just a thing with timing. I didn't have enough time to rent it again, and I really wanted to put this video out so I can give you my review on the other books. Okay, so we're getting to the top 4. So book number 4, it is a book by James S. Corey, The Mercy of Gods. And I think this book has its good and its bad things, but it's mostly bad. And I was sad about it because I was really looking forward to the next adventure. But I'm going to tell you what it's about first. So this book is set in a completely different planet from Earth. The people came from Earth, but they don't really remember where Earth was. And they don't know how to get back there. And they've been in this new civilization for many years. For like probably like a couple generations, like at least 5 generations. But the population hasn't gotten to be like big like it was. It's probably just like 10 million people, nothing crazy. So they're living under these, I believe they're domes, but they're living under something to kind of like prevent the atmosphere from going bad. And they also are all part of this university. The university has become extremely important, and most of the people that work at the university are kind of like celebrities in a lot of ways because a lot of the research is coming out of there to kind of like make their life survivable. So you're following this research group formed of, I think there's like 6 people in the research group total, when one day another alien species comes and attacks them and kind of like takes the best of the bunch. So they take all the smartest humans and put them all together and take them to a completely different planet. And now the whole point of the book becomes this kind of trials, but they're not really trials, where all the humans kind of like have to get together in order to solve this problem for them. And if they solve the problem, they kind of can become part of like the alien federation. And depending on how smart the aliens determine them to be is how much advantages they get in society. So if they kind of like determine that they're like very like they can barely read or write, they're not very useful, they'll become kind of like servants for the rest of the alien species. So it's very important for this group of humans that are in this alien spaceship to do very well in the trials in order to go up. So the thing about this book and me is that I was promised trials, and I was not given trials. These are not trials. You basically plop all these depressed people who just lost all their friends and family into a lab, and you watch them be in the lab for like 400 pages, and you're like, why am I here? This is so boring. And and the whole like thing, everything around them, like if I was like exploring the space station more, like the spaceship, and learning more about all the other alien creatures, that would be fun and interesting. If they were giving like actual trials that have like actual like ways to like kind of assess how smart people are, that would be interesting. If I was giving more dynamics in between and that one they give me a little bit. You did saw a lot of dynamics between the people that were in the spaceship before and after, because when they were in the university, you had like somebody that was very clearly the team leader and very clearly the professor, and you have all their roles very determined, very nice, and then you put them in this completely new setting and people's like dynamics change, because some people fare better with it than others. So like the research assistant now becomes the leader, and you're like, what, like how is that happening? So you just see a little bit of that, but not enough that it became like all interpersonal drama really became like the thing pushing the plot. It was kind of there but kind of not. And then you have this other alien species that is kind of infiltrated the research group and is kind of manipulating them. And I wish I saw a little bit more of that, but that one is all set up. So that's the problem. I think this book is all set up for other books, and I don't like that, mainly because I cannot be bored for that long for setup. And I know that this book is going to continue, and it's like as it gets bigger, it's going to get more interesting, and you're going to get more of everything I wanted. But as a promise of just either a fun space adventure or trials or some sort of like plot that was moving the story forward, it kind of failed in that regards. I think you could have used that whole like being a school setting in a lot of ways to your advantage, to have like classes or anything else, because they were really just like in a lab for many pages, kind of like twiddling their thumbs and trying to figure out how to use this technology, and it was pretty boring. So I gave it 2 stars, but I will pick the next book up. Okay, and the next book in the series is Annie Bot. So that got top 3, and honestly, this one's my favorite, and it is extremely problematic, but it is still my favorite because it was so gosh darn interesting. So this book is about robot who was made to be a sex robot. It was made to please, and so she is owned by this guy who's very toxic. He just got divorced, and his wife, he was very controlling to his wife, but he got hired as Antibot in order to kind of like get over his ex-wife. And there's a program where the robot can just be like a normal like sex robot, or you can actually turn it into being like a sentient robot, so it kind of like pleases you better. So he did that, and now Antibot actually has like feelings and emotions, and she's starting to become a real human. And the more things that she experiences, the more likely she becomes to be more like a human. So you're following her from like basically when she becomes like conscious all the way to the end of the story, and she kind of like starts. At first, she was only meant to please, and that's her main action, to please. But because this guy is very controlling and very narcissistic, pleasing him is very difficult. Like she doesn't really know what he wants because he goes hot and cold so easily. So she's having a really difficult time, and then you're also following her all throughout this, but there are some very descriptive sexual scenes that can make people extremely uncomfortable, and I think they were incredibly well made because they do give you that turmoil inside of you where you're like, oh, why am I turned on? This is so icky. But like then it worked because they were like written very well. It looks like it was almost like porn that you didn't want to watch, and like kind of like a Clockwork Orange where it gave you like a physical response, but you're like, ew, I don't like that. So it is well made in that regards, but that's why I'm like, I think this book is going to be very polarizing, because a lot of people will think that it's just like torture porn, like kind of like the type of books that it's like, why are you reading that? But then again, it has some very interesting points being made about like how it is to be in a narcissistic relationship, what it is to be human, what it is to try to please somebody to such an extent that you're actually doing harm to yourself. So, and then like also what it takes to get out of a toxic relationship, and what it is to like lose your self-motivation and your agency as a person, or if you never had agency to begin with, how men can manipulate vulnerable women who basically were teenagers, and you just like kind of like groom them. So it's a lot about grooming too. So I think it's just extremely interesting, and it can cause some very interesting conversations, specifically if you're like a part of a women's book club or women's studies class that's reading this book. I think you can have a really interesting talk about it, but it doesn't mean that it's not very toxic and very graphic, and it can be very triggering for some people. But it was just fascinating to me, and I kept thinking about it like days and days afterwards, and I was like, why did she do this, and why did he did that? And like honestly, the guy is extremely toxic, and he was subtly toxic though. Like people around him wouldn't say that he was toxic, so that's what made him such an interesting character, because he had everybody else fooled and kind of gave you a look into what that dynamic might look like. But my only but, and there's a lot of, honestly, trigger warnings up the wazoo for this one, but also, I think the ending kind of flopped. The ending kind of, I'm not gonna spoil it, but if you know, you know. I didn't like the ending. I think it got resolved like way too easily, and I think it kind of did a disservice to the book that you were showing how difficult it is to get out of a toxic relationship for so long, and then it kind of like changed at the end just to have a happy ending. I don't think it's what it should have happened, and I think it, I don't know how you would have made it better, but I didn't like how it ended. Okay. So I'm running out of time in my battery, so I'm just going to go with number 2. So number 2 is The Family Experiment. This one is fascinating. Also, I think I love this sci-fi books where it's kind of like Black Mirror, and it's just like a weird situation and you're just following it for a little bit. So The Family Experiment is about a reality TV show set in England where people are kind of like taking care of this like AI baby in the metaverse. So it's not a real baby, and they're kind of like using headsets in order to be in the metaverse and take care of this baby, and people can vote on how to take care of this baby. And if you are the best one, the best couple, and there's some single people there too who takes care of this baby, you can actually become the parent, and you can actually get a lot of cash money, and you can also get money funded for your real life baby, in vitro adoption, whatever you need the money for. So that's the setup of it. But of course, in true, this John Mars, he writes one of these every year. In true John Mars fashion, everybody's interconnected, and there's something else going on in the background that is 1,000 times more sinister than you can ever imagine. And that was what makes John Mars books so much fun. You always know, you're always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And now that I've read so many of them, I think I've read all of his books so far. It's just so much fun and entertaining. Honestly, if you know his books, you'll love this one. He keeps going. He's going up and he's going up and he's going up. And I'm kind of waiting for one of his books to be a dud, but it'll be a sad day when that happens, because this one's another banger. I give it 4 stars. And then the last book, I hate it, and it's the winner. So the winner is The Ministry of Time. This book sucks. And I've heard a couple people that like this, but I don't think it's very popular in BookTube. I think my opinion is the common one here. The Ministry of Time is about this woman who works for a ministry in the United Kingdom, and they just found a time machine. They don't know exactly how the time machine works, so instead of like sending some people into the future, they decide to bring some people from the past into current day in order to see how they adapt and how they transit, how like the whole experiment takes a toll on their body, and see if like they get any weird cancer, so they kind of like become dumb and don't really know how to process anything anymore. So they bring people from the past into the future, and you're following this person who is part of the Ministry of Time, who basically is bringing somebody from the future, and she's in charge of his everyday care. And it's very boring. The premise sounds 1,000% better than the actual book. You actually don't get any of the quirky things that you would get if somebody from the past came into the future. You get a little bit of it, but nothing too interesting or crazy. And then everything kind of like resolves in the end in a big like like a spy action thriller adventure. It is meh at its best. And I honestly had such high expectations after I heard people talk about it that I think a 2-star is necessary, just because I was bored, depressed, and also just why. So yeah, that is the winner, and my memory camera is about to die, so I'm gonna say bye. Thank you for being with me for this year's Goodreads Choice Awards. I hope you enjoyed this video.